We always try to build our P's and K's. We're always trying to target that sweet spot of index 3 for P's and K's. We find K's a lot easier to build on our soil types. We're chopping straw, we're using organic manures, we're getting out good levels of K. If you're in an index 3 versus a high index 2, the difference in the levels in your soil is very little, but the impact that has on how much organic manure you can take in is massive. For example, if you're in a high index 2, you can take in 100% more organic manure than if you're in a low index 3.
All farmers aim to apply the right inputs at the right time, but challenges like weather, product availability and varying soil types often mean blanket applications are the norm rather than more precise, targeted inputs. Have you managed to increase precision on your farm over the past few years? You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We'd really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. This week, the Tillage Signpost programme held an event on Don Summers' farm in Oilgate, County Wexford, to explore how he's applying inputs with greater accuracy. I caught up with Don at the end of the meeting and just before he drove off to complete some spraying.
Winter crops for the most part look quite good. They're dealing with this particularly dry weather better than spring crops. They could do with another little bit of water to keep them going till harvest. Spring crops are a bit of a different picture. They were sowed into perfect conditions in the first few days of April, but unfortunately they got 105 millimetres of rain on the Easter Saturday and the subsequent 4 or 5 days. So they did suffer a bit from that. They have recovered relatively well, but they have gone from showing signs of stress from the wet to now showing signs of drought stress. So we're hoping that if we can get a little bit of rain anytime soon to keep them going, that'll be a big help. The prospects wouldn't be as good as winter crops, but look, they're okay.
And even with this lovely winter crop we're in here, it's pretty sandy just down on the ground. I see a couple of spots here probably lacking a tiny bit of water. Are they suffering?
Yeah, we've been a particularly sandy bit of ground that I have right now, but the majority of our land will be of a heavier nature and doesn't suffer as much with the drought. But the plan with sowing winter barley in the likes of this land is that it has passed that critical point normally before it runs out of water where it's starting to ripen, so it's probably hitting a bit earlier than normal this year. I mean, we don't normally have droughts in May in this part of Wexford, but on the average I'll take 2 acres of winter crop for every 5 acres of spring crops that we have.
Just in terms of, because we were talking a lot today around utilising nutrients an awful lot better, especially nitrogen, but just we'll focus on maybe P and K, and as it was talked about today, on your soils, you've soil sampled a lot over the last number of years, have you?
Yeah, we did. We introduced more extensive soil sampling back in 2020 at the beginning of the Signpost programme because I had more soil sampling available to me. We started to work off of yield maps rather than in the past we would have divided up into, say, 10 acres or whatever it was, and then we decided to work off yield maps and look at the higher yielding parts of the field, the lower yielding parts of the field and the medium yielding parts of the field, and divided fields up for soil sampling based on that. I think the average plot size was around 1.9 hectares, which is probably half what the typical farmer is doing. But we were able to look at those specific areas and see, was there higher or lower yield down to a nutrient problem, or was there something else underlying that? And for the most part, it wasn't a nutrient problem. There were slight variations in pH, but in 90% of fields, the P's and K's were fairly consistent.
Okay. So pHs were okay as well, were they?
The biggest variations were in pH, but the variations were still small.
Okay. So it's what's underneath the ground then, really? What was the problem?
Yeah,
was it
it's a natural constraint. It's either, say, shading or a wet spot or a different soil type in a different part of the field, but it's normally a natural constraint and not a nutrient constraint that impacts on yield.
Okay. And looking across all of you, because you've done a lot of soil sampling, looking across all of your soil samples here on our handout, you have a fairly big percentage of soils in index P2. And the majority of your soils are index 3 and 4s for potassium. Is that by chance, or are you trying to manage them like that?
We always try to build our P's and K's. We're always trying to target that sweet spot of Index 3 for P's and K's. We find K's a lot easier to build on our soil types. We're chopping straw, we're using organic manures, we're getting out good levels of K. The P then is a slightly different story. Traditionally, we targeted the Index 3, but with the nitrate register that's there and the nitrate allowance, or the phosphorus allowance you have for your farm, if you're in an Index 3 versus a high Index 2, the difference in the levels in your soil is very little, but the impact that has on how much organic manure you can take in is massive. For example, if you're in a high Index 2, you can take in 100% more organic manure than if you're in a low Index 3.
Because the allowance jumps from 50% to
50%
100%.
allowance to 100% availability.
Availability, yes.
So that's the difference. So we are currently trying to maintain a high Index 2 and not creep into the Index 3, purely so we can keep taking in the same levels of organic manure we're currently taking in.
Okay, and what organic manures are you taking in?
Mostly poultry manure. We do take in some farmyard manure, so there's some local farmers where they take my straw and I take back their farmyard manure. I'm hesitant to take in farmyard manure from an unknown source, but we're always limited by the amount of farmyard manure that's available. But a winter like the one gone, where say a stock farmer couldn't get out onto his grassland early enough with dung, ends up benefiting me where they've nowhere to go with it. It gets too late, grass gets too strong, and I end up getting it. So that was one benefit I saw.
And are you targeting that organic manures to specific crops or sites based on maybe soil reports?
Yeah, the poultry manure, except for winter oilseed rape, all goes on spring crops, so spring barley, spring oats. We don't apply it onto our legumes because there's no nitrogen requirement. We don't use it on winter wheat or winter barley because the nitrogen requirement for that crop is very small, so it would be a bad use of nitrogen and my nitrogen allowance to use that on a winter crop like that. But we do find great results from it on winter oilseed rape. Then the likes of the farmyard manure, because we can't get as much of it we like, we tend to use it more targeted, say on a particularly tough headland. If we can put some out there, or a field that has low organic matter levels, we tend to be more specific where we put that out based on the soil or the field rather than the crop.
Okay, and for the poultry manure then, are you ploughing it in, or how are you incorporating it into the soils?
We incorporate through min-till. We are a min-till farm. I'd have been very slow to plough a field, but last November, when we got a small weather window, we pulled out the plough, and that's the reason you're looking at winter crops here today, and the reason you're not looking at a spring crop that's suffering with the drought. So, as I said, I'm a min-till farmer, but I've come to the conclusion that if you need to plough to get a crop sowed, you need to plough. But for the normal routine would be to apply the poultry manure and incorporate it into the soil straight away with the cultivator, and keep that as close to sowing as possible, so it's not left exposed on top of the soil, and it's as close to the drilling date as possible then as well, so that instantly that nitrogen can be used as efficiently as it possibly can.
In terms of the total, Don, say for let's say spring barley crop, you're going to put out some poultry manure for that. Do you have an idea in your head as regards the total amount of N, P and K that poultry manure is going to replace in terms of chemical fertiliser?
Yeah, well, we get the poultry manure tested, so we'll be getting a number of loads over a winter, and we take random samples. They're sent off for testing. We'll have a number of tests then on that, and we'll take an average result because it's mixed up in the shed. So we know how many tonnes of the product we have and how much N, P and K is in that. We know from our soil tests what the fields are bringing to it, and we will sit down then, I'll sit down with my geographic advisor, and we'll go through a nutrient management plan looking at different crops, what the cropping history is, what that crop's requirements are, how much poultry manure we have for it, and then we work out how much chemical fertiliser is required to give the crop the balance of that. So for example, in spring barley, if I sow it relatively early, I'm working off 110 units of nitrogen required from that crop. I'll get 45% of that nitrogen from poultry manure. I'll get about 60% of my P from poultry manure and 100% of my K from poultry manure. So depending on the field in the soil test, I'll balance that out either through a compound put out with the drill, and then the remainder of nitrogen in whichever form of nitrogen I'm choose to use.
A lot of people would view the organic manures as a bit of a hassle and a bit difficult to put out, and it's not so simple, and you have to get contractors involved in it and have to adjust my fertiliser afterwards. You obviously don't feel that in terms of it's really worthwhile, certainly given the fact that the nutrients that it's replacing, it's cost effective for you.
It's definitely cost effective when you consider the cost of the particular nutrients you're putting out in the organic manures. Like, you could be saving €50-60 an acre on chemical fertiliser by replacing that with organics. So you're well paid to do the extra planning that's required to work out what you need and where you need it, and then with the logistics of getting it to the field, again, you're well paid to do that. There's also the things that organic manures bring that don't come in a bag, so you're going to have things like bacteria, organic matter, carbon that you're putting back into your soil. There is no price for that, there's no value for it.
So it's more alive, basically?
Yes, it's your better soil health. I've noticed this year where we've been applying poultry manure historically for a number of years, it seems to be showing less signs of stress due to drought. So is there better moisture retention? Is it the slow release of the nutrients in that? It definitely brings things that can't be quantified just in euros per acre cost. But once you do the planning, once you have the logistics, I decided when I was going to go down this route to buy my own spreader, so I'm not dependent on a contractor. I'm not asking a contractor to come and do 2 hours today and 4 hours next week. I can do it exactly when I want, as I want, and it does help keep the cost down slightly as well.
And in terms of balancing up the fertilisers, you put out a bit of poultry manure here, or your farmyard manure over there. In terms of balancing it out, is that more hassle for you in terms of that, the chemical fertiliser, having to adjust rates or having to use maybe a different product or top it up with a straight, for instance?
It can be. It depends on the crop in a given year. As I said, I sit down with my geographical advisor, John Pettit, and we'll work out a nutrient management plan based on how much organic manure is to get, and then we'll work out, sometimes it'll be a compound that'll give us the right amount of P and K to balance that out. We can always adjust the N with the final applications of N. Sometimes it just won't work and we look at using straight, so we might use straight P. I have some fields that are, say, index 4 for K. I've chopped the straw in previous years. I'm planning to chop the straw in the coming year, so I might feel that crop doesn't need any K applied, so I'll use DAP or I'll use nitrogen and Super P. But every field is kind of tailored specifically. Sometimes a variable rate map might be required to feed the crop exactly what it needs. So we don't want to over apply and we don't want to under apply N, P and K to our fields.
So for this year then, in terms of the amount of different compounds you bought, did you buy 2 or 3, or could you get away with 1 in terms of your crop mixes that you had and the use of all the other organics? I
used 1 compound this year. It was a CCF 18612. The plan would have been maybe to use a CCF of 18612 or a CCF of 101020 or 12820, something with say lower levels of nitrogen, but the only CCF fertiliser I could find available that suited me was an 18612, so that was used at different rates in different crops, and then we balanced out the nitrogen after. Yeah. But because we have index 4 for K, a lot of places we could pull back on K if we got the P requirements we needed from the 18612. So this year we literally had 18612, I had CCF, urea, sulphur compound and a small bit of ordinary straight protected urea.
Okay, and you're using protected urea as your main chemical fertiliser source, are you?
Up until this year I had relatively good experiences with protected urea in 2022 when I started using it. I had mixed results in 23, so I decided to do more frequent checking of the fertiliser spreader. I was putting the problem down to the fertiliser spreader, and even with regular trade tests I was still having issues in 2024. So this year, rather than doing the same process over and over again, I decided to switch not completely but mostly to a CCF compound of urea and sulphur, which from the suppliers they were telling me had a better characteristic for spreading. It was harder, it didn't break as easily under impact, so this year we used mostly that, and I have to say I've had better results, but unfortunately I won't be able to use this product in the future because it's not in a protected form, so we could be back to the drawing board next year looking for a suitable fertiliser. As
we're at this event today, there was a lot about Signpost Farm event, a lot about sustainability in there as well, and part of that is water quality. On the farm you mentioned a couple of things that you were doing for water quality to try and protect and keep what you have, what you've spread, if you like, on the ground, trying to keep it in your soils. You might outline a couple of things that you're doing.
Yeah, well I suppose like you said, we're going to all these great lengths to try use what we can as efficiently as possible. Even in a perfect world we can never use it 100% efficiently, so the next step then is to try retain what we have to make sure it doesn't end up in a water course, whatever's not used. So I suppose step 1 of that is applying it as efficiently as possible, getting it spread as accurately as possible, putting out only the right rate for what the crop needs, getting that side of it right, and then the next step is to retain anything that's not used. So I suppose step one is cover cropping. We do as much cover cropping as is practically possible. For example, last year we did less than normal because the conditions just weren't suitable for cover cropping. I feel you would do more harm than good sowing cover crops into a wet soil at the end of September. But as a rule, we get in behind the combine as close as possible, either if the straw's chopped that evening in behind the combine and get a cover crop sowed. We stay clear of brassica cover crops because we grow oilseed rape on the farm, so it's mostly the likes of Phacelia, vetch, clovers. We tried some linseed last year, which all seemed to work relatively well apart from the sowing date. But yeah, step two is getting a cover crop in there, and cover crops definitely have brought a lot from holding on to whatever nutrients are not used, plus they're putting organic matter and carbon, and there's a biodiversity benefit there where you're putting other species into your soil, which feeds, under the soil and over the soil, is good for biodiversity.
And you're retaining them until February?
Depending on the crop. For example, where we're in this winter barley, my plan would be to cover crop that immediately after the straw is baled, and the plan then would be to disc that and drill directly into the crop residue, so that will be, there should be green cover there almost all year round. In the spring then, we kind of find it's a balancing act. I'd like to keep the cover crops there as long as I can, but if we leave them there too late, there's the risk of not breaking the green bridge. There's also the risk of them preventing land from drying out. If you spray them off too early, say on the 1st of January, your soil slumps and you've no cover there. So mid to late February is kind of the sweet spot. If I had low levels of grasses like annual meadowgrass in my cover crops, I'd be inclined to leave them there a lot longer. If I have a lot of annual meadowgrass in my cover crops, I'll tend to drill them a bit earlier because it's slower to break down. But if I've mostly Phacelia and vetch and linseed, that's pretty easy got rid of with a disc, so I'll leave it there for longer.
Okay. And are you using any margins at all in terms of protecting watercourses?
Other than observing the 3 metre buffers up until this year, no. This year now, under the water EIP scheme, I put in a 3 metre arable grass margin on one field in particular that runs down to the banks of the River Slaney. So I could see the benefit from it there, and if I can't apply fertiliser and I can't apply pesticides, what's the point in even sowing it? So the EIP scheme basically paid for the seed and the cost of installing it. I'm trying it there with the intention of rolling it out onto any other place where there's an entry point for runoff in the field to enter a watercourse. I don't think there's a need for them everywhere, but anywhere that water can enter a watercourse directly off a field, the plan would be to put them in there.
And not a lot of hassle to your farming setup, really?
Not right now. I mean, if you can't apply fertiliser and you can't apply pesticides, you're not going to grow anything there, so it doesn't actually bring, once you put a grassy mix there that's going to control weed species you don't want, it probably brings more benefits than anything else.
Last question for you before we let you go, because we're just standing here beside the sprayer and you're mad to get going, I can see it in you. The last question is, you're a bit of a pioneer in terms of bringing out research from Oak Park around the proteins and the mixed protein species that are out there. You had them last year, you have them again this year because we're looking at them. Obviously you liked them enough to keep going?
I liked the profitability from it. If I'm being honest, it was my most profitable crop last year. It was a low standard last year, crops weren't very profitable, but I was keen to try it. It wasn't without its challenges, but at the end of the day, it was my most profitable crop. So this year, we're trying it again. We've tweaked it slightly. We've changed our type of pea. We used a pea called Carrington last year, which was not great for standing up. This year we switched to one called England, which has better lodging resistance, so hopefully that'll help a lot there. We've tweaked the seeding rate of the beans in the hope to keep it standing.
What's the ratio you're using?
It's about 70% peas, 30% beans. Any lower than that, we found there weren't enough peas to keep it standing. Any higher than that didn't prevent lodging any better, and you were reducing the amount of pea you had, so you were reducing. At the end of the day, what you really want is the pea. The bean is there to keep it up. It does bring a certain amount of yield to it, but we're trying to grow peas with beans, keeping them up, so kind of 70-30 seemed to be the sweet spot. But it's worth persevering with because as a tillage farmer, I'd love to see a native Irish ration. I'd love to see a ration that's available with only Irish grains used in it, and I'd love to see end users buying that ration. So if this is the part I have to play to help get that off the ground and get it going, I'm prepared to scrape a few peas off the ground until we get it right, and hopefully when we do get it right, the end users will be happy to use it, and it's another break crop for my farm. It's another thing for biodiversity on my farm. It's a different species. It's a legume versus a cereal, so all these things can only be positive once we can get the practical side of it right.
Listen, Don, thanks very much for your time. I'll let you back spraying now, and look, we'll be chatting to you again.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for coming today.
So that's it for this episode, and my thanks to Don for joining me on the podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.